For most of the 20th century, a country named Yugoslavia existed in southeastern Europe, which today is now recognized as six fully independent countries. In 1941, Yugoslavia was occupied by Nazi Germany and Fascist Italy during World War II. The breakup of Yugoslavia was a process in which the Socialist Federal Republic of Yugoslavia was broken up into constituent republics and over the course of which the Yugoslav Wars started. In the early 1990s, the Balkan country of Yugoslavia fell apart in a series of wars which saw ethnic cleansing and a genocide return to Europe. The driving force for all of this was simply distinctly modern nationalism, fanned by the media and driven by politicians. As Yugoslavia collapsed, majority of ethnicities pushed for independence. These nationalist governments ignored their minorities or actively persecuted them, forcing them out of their jobs. The Balkans had been the site of conflict between the Austrian and Ottoman empires for centuries before both collapsed during World War I. The peace conference, which redrew the maps of Europe, created the kingdom of Serbs, Croats, and Slovenes out of territory in the area, pushing together groups of people who had soon quarrelled about how they wished to be governed. Many people have claimed that the wars of former Yugoslavia were caused by hatred between the various ethnic groups of people that went back for centuries. The truth, however, is not so simple. For hundreds of years, Serbs, Croats, Muslims, Montenegrins, Macedonians, and Slovenes lived side by side, often in mixed towns and villages. An alternative view is that the war came about because of politicians wishing to further their own ambitions. Whatever the causes, the wars of former Yugoslavia have resulted in hardship and misery for countless people. There is little wonder that the war has been called the Balkan tragedy. Serious fighting in Croatia began in June 1991 when the republic and its northern neighbour, Slovenia, declared themselves independent from Yugoslavia, and Serbs living in Croatia, supported by the Yugoslav People's Army, opposed this move. The United Nations became actively involved in the situation in Yugoslavia on 25th of September 1991 when the Security Council, meeting at the ministerial level, unanimously adopted its resolution expressing deep concern at the fighting in the country and calling on all states to implement immediately a general and complete embargo on deliveries of weapons and military equipment to Yugoslavia. Initially, the United Nations took no part in the Balkans crisis. One reason was the European community's enthusiasm for handling the problem itself, and the other reason being that the conflict was seen as an internal dispute and therefore not within the ambit of the UN. Cyrus Vance was appointed as the UN Special Envoy to the former Yugoslavia and organised the deployment of UN peacekeeping troops to Croatia. The first troops of the United Nations Protection Force began arriving in Croatia in March 1992. The plan called for the deployment of just over 50,000 troops, plus civilian personnel and police in three different areas. Armed Serbian military forces had occupied these three regions and had seen some of the most intense fighting. The peacekeepers became involved in organising patrols to protect homes, carrying out immigration and customs functions at borders, and supporting the provision of essential humanitarian assistance. However, by the end of 1993, with the United Nations Protection Force numbering just under 34,000 troops, and with the war continuing unabated, UN involvement was being written off as a failure. The UN-EU mediators were widely criticised for assisting Serb aggressors. Humanitarian relief organisations threatened to withdraw. The way in which peacekeepers were used was labelled misuse of peacekeeping.